Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for what feels like a high-speed chase, really, across the Ethereum blockchain. We're tracking a transaction so huge it momentarily shook the entire crypto community.
Yeah, it definitely got everyone talking.
The mission today is, simple on the surface, but the details are anything but. We're diving deep into this recent kind of dizzying transfer of over $600 million worth of Ethereum.
600 million. Just let that sink in.
Exactly. And we're going to identify the highly controversial, actually globally wanted figure behind it all. And then we'll analyze the community panic that followed and the whole complicated legal history, a history really defined by jurisdictional failure that kind of set the stage for this. So this deep dive, it's really your shortcut to understanding this complex mix of detailed on-chain analysis, the international regulatory challenges, and, high-stakes pseudonymous finance in the crypto world. We're going right to the heart of what happens when massive wealth moves silently and rapidly in the shadows.
And when you say massive, we really do mean historic. This is the kind of move that absolutely guarantees global headlines. The core event that really grabbed everyone's attention happened on October 19th, 2025.
Right.
A single entity, which sophisticated blockchain monitoring services very heavily and very quickly associated with the founder, Richard Hart, who's also known in some legal filings by his birth name, Richard Schuller.
Schuller, right.
Yeah. He moved roughly 154,000 ETH to brand new addresses.
154,000 ETH. I mean, that number alone should make you sit up straight. But when you actually anchor it to real-world money, the scale just hits you.
Precisely. The initial valuation of that single massive transfer, it was hovering somewhere between, let's say, $608 million and $611 million USD. Depends a bit on the price swings within that hour,
Wow.
But yeah, this instantly put the transfer into rarefied air.
Yeah.
For a single non-exchange entity to move that sheer volume of Ethereum in one very synchronized action, it's undoubtedly among the largest on-chain transfers by an individual entity in the entire history of Ethereum.
That's incredible.
It really is. It's the type of movement that signals either, maybe a major institutional restructuring or, given this founder's history, probably something far more suspicious and strategic.
And crucially, this wasn't exactly subtle, right? I mean, when you move over $500 million, the whole blockchain community basically becomes this digital surveillance network.
Yeah.
Every on-chain detective immediately wanted to know, where did the money go?
That is the central question. It defined the next 72 hours of analysis, really. The movement itself, how it was done, became a kind of Rosetta Stone for trying to understand the intent behind it all.
Okay, so let's unpack this $600 million move then. As you said, it wasn't just one single transaction. The mechanics themselves, they actually reveal quite a lot about maybe the founder's intentions and operational security, right?
Absolutely.
So on October 19th, 2025, that roughly 154,000 ETH was systematically distributed. Not to one or two addresses, no, but to at least 22 newly created separate wallets.
22 new wallets.
Yeah. But that huge move wasn't the only thing happening that day. This massive disbursement was actually the culmination of a really rapid, carefully orchestrated series of transfers, including an earlier, also highly significant movement of 81,000 ETH worth around $323 million, all happening within just a 5-hour window on that same day.
Wow, 5 hours. That's fast.
It was a complex, multi-stage operation.
Yeah.
Seems designed for speed and, critically, for segmentation, splitting it all up.
And we really need to understand the source of these funds because they weren't just random ETH appearing out of nowhere.
Right.
The original addresses involved, they were already known to analysts for, accumulating and holding massive crypto reserves. They were tracked actually purchasing 132,000 ETH back in March 2023.
Okay, March 2023.
Yeah. And at the time, they executed this purchase using 499 million DAI, the dollar-pegged stablecoin.
Oh, okay. So using DAI makes the price basis pretty clear then. That purchase valued the ETH reserves at an average acquisition price of, roughly $3,707 per coin?
Correct. And this shows, a long-term, extremely high-stakes commitment to holding these large crypto reserves. They acquired this ETH at a pretty significant price point.
Yeah.
And now those highly scrutinized reserves, worth considerably more now, obviously, are being fragmented and scattered across 24 new digital addresses. The segmentation, the splitting, that's the key to understanding the strategy here.
So if the funds were bought around $3,770, and the transfer was valued at over $600 million, the founder's clearly moving money that's appreciated substantially. Huge gains. This is where the on-chain detectives, as you call them, really spring into action. What patterns did they immediately spot in how these transfers were structured?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the analysts weren't just like guessing based on the sheer size of it all. They were recognizing a distinctive operational signature, a pattern.
Ah,
They immediately noted that the flow into these 22 new wallets mirrored prior strategies, specifically things called recycling and layering, that have long been associated with Richard Hart's past fundraising activities and how he moves funds.
okay, let's break those terms down a bit because, for our deep dive listener, the nuance really matters. We've heard recycling before in the context of his fundraising, but what exactly is layering or segmentation in this new context?
Yeah, good point. Recycling, which we'll definitely get into more detail on later, that was something that happened during the initial token offerings, essentially to manufacture demand, make it look like there was more interest than there was.
Okay.
Layering, which is what we seem to be seeing now, that's purely about obscuring ownership,
Yeah.
making it harder to track, and preparing for, well, movement or trying to avoid seizure.
Got it.
So we're talking about known patterns here. The systematic segmentation, right, splitting that 154,000 ETH into dozens of these subsidiary wallets, the suspected use of crypto mixers, and the timing, the synchronized activity across all the addresses, which suggests coordination. When analysts talk about segmentation, they literally mean breaking one massive pool of capital into many smaller, much less traceable pools. Think about it. If a regulator somehow managed to successfully freeze one wallet, they'd still have 21 others they'd need to track down and pursue. It dramatically increases the legal burden, the effort required for any kind of seizure.
So segmentation is basically a tactical move, protect the total capital pool by chopping it up. But you also mentioned mixers. Now, for our informed listener, how exactly does a crypto mixer help in this obfuscation process, especially when you're talking about such a huge volume of ETH?
Well, a mixer, or sometimes called a tumbler, it's basically designed to break the direct link between where the funds came from and where they're going.
Okay.
Imagine like pouring your specific coins into this giant digital pot that contains hundreds or thousands of other people's coins. And then you pull out the equivalent amount, but they're different coins, essentially untraceable back to your originals.
Ah,
Now, for 154,000 ETH, this process gets exponentially more complex, obviously. But if the funds pass through a mixer successfully, it basically makes forensic tracking almost impossible for, say, law enforcement trying to trace those funds back to the original address they know is tied to Richard Hart. This kind of operational security, or OPSEC, it's designed for maximum obfuscation and fungibility, making the money look clean.
which brings us right back to the central question, the ambiguity of this whole move, the intent. We know how it moved, how it was structured, why segmentation helps, but analysts can't definitively confirm the explicit purpose of this massive 154,000 ETH transfer.
Yeah.
So strategically speaking, where did the money go? What are the main motives analysts are kicking around?
Yeah, the discussion really boils down to three core possibilities, and each one has pretty different market implications. The first one, and maybe the least dramatic, is just simple secure storage or, hiding. The founder is facing an Interpol red notice. His assets have been seized internationally before, so moving assets to 22 brand new addresses, possibly held offline in cold storage, makes them extremely difficult to seize legally, especially in bulk. So this could just be about securing the assets, keeping them away from potential regulatory or legal nets.
Okay, but if they just wanted secure storage, why 22 wallets? Why not just one, super secure cold storage wallet? That complexity kind of points toward the second motive, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The second motive is active obfuscation, masking ownership. This ties directly back to that layering strategy we talked about. By constantly passing the funds through multiple new sort of clean addresses, it becomes much, much harder for regulators to definitively link those assets back to the original source address, which is already flagged globally. It basically transforms the assets from being one single high-profile target into, 24 smaller, more anonymous targets. Each one requires individual, resource-intensive legal efforts to track and then link back to the founder.
So it's not just hiding, it's making the tracking effort almost economically unviable for the authorities. A logistical nightmare. And the third motive, the one that's sparking the most immediate fear in the crypto market.
Yeah, that's the big one. That is the fear of preparation for a massive liquidation on exchanges, the potential market dump. The community's greatest fear here is that these 22 new wallets aren't just storage units, they're staging areas. They're now perfectly positioned to start selling hundreds of millions of dollars worth of ETH. And even for a huge asset like Ethereum, the sudden sale of $600 million worth of ETH would put enormous downward pressure on the market price. It could create serious market volatility, maybe even trigger panic sales from others. And we simply cannot analyze the intent of this transfer in a vacuum, right? We have to bring the central figure, Richard Hart, into sharp focus because his controversial history really provides the key to deciphering this massive movement. Richard Hart, also known sometimes as Richard Schuller, is an immensely controversial, yet you have to admit, undeniably influential crypto entrepreneur.
Yeah, he's not just a founder. He's become this huge personality known for like maximalism and showcasing extreme luxury. He is the creator behind 3 major interconnected projects. HEX, which
Yeah.
was a high-yield staking token launched back in 2019.
Right, HEX.
Then Pulse Chain, which is basically an Ethereum fork designed to be, faster and cheaper. And PulseX, which is a decentralized exchange, DS, built within that Pulse Chain ecosystem.
And he is perhaps just as famous, maybe even more famous, for the controversy surrounding those projects as he is for their, technical existence. Hart has faced allegations for a long time now, market manipulation, the misuse of investor funds, and a pretty clear pattern of opaque, really complex on-chain behavior. Behavior which, interestingly, analysts immediately recognized as being mirrored in this recent 154,000 ETH transfer. They saw the signature.
Yeah, and that pattern of behavior led directly to the most significant legal challenge he faced, at least in the U.S., those specific charges filed by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, back in July 2023. And these charges were frankly staggering in their scope and detail.
They absolutely were. The SEC specifically alleged multiple major violations. The first was the unregistered sales of securities through HEX, Pulse Chain, and PulseX. They argued these were basically investment contracts and should have been registered with the government. Simple enough.
Standard SEC charge for crypto projects, yeah.
Right. But the charge that really captured the public imagination, the one that made headlines, was the alleged misappropriation of at least $12 million of investor funds, specifically for his own personal luxury purchases.
Okay, this is where we probably need to spend a moment detailing those specific allegations, because it really illustrates the gravity of what the SEC was claiming.
Yeah.
What kind of examples did they cite to try and prove that $12 million was allegedly misused?
Yeah, the filing was incredibly specific, which, lent tremendous credibility to the SEC's on-chain tracing capabilities. They were good at following the money. They cited purchases of various expensive cars, high-end jewelry, and most notably, one single asset that kind of became the symbol of the alleged excess, the record-setting Enigma Black Diamond.
The Enigma diamond.
Right.
Like, this wasn't just any diamond, was it? I remember reading about this.
Far from it. The SEC claimed Hart used misappropriated funds investor money to purchase this diamond for $4.3 million.
Wow.
It holds the distinction of being the world's largest cut black diamond, a 555-carat natural stone. When regulators can cite unique multi-million-dollar luxury items like a record-setting black diamond, it dramatically amplifies the perceived severity of the alleged misuse of investor funds. It makes the abstract concept of misappropriation very, very tangible for a jury or just for the public reading about it.
Yeah, absolutely. A giant black diamond is hard to ignore.
Yeah.
So this alleged misuse of $12 million is shocking enough, but the real financial complexity of the SEC's case, it's centered around that core mechanism you mentioned earlier, the recycling. This seems to be the cornerstone of their fraud allegation. Can you dive into what this recycling mechanism actually was and why it allegedly made the fundraising efforts for HEX and Pulse Chain look, well, massively illegitimate?
Right. This is where the forensic blockchain analysis really paid huge dividends for the regulators. The SEC detailed this deliberate pattern of recycling transactions during the initial fundraising phases, the ICOs, initial coin offerings, particularly for HEX. The concept is pretty insidious, actually.
Okay.
The Ethereum deposited by actual investors into the fundraising contract wasn't just sitting there or being used for development or growth. No, it was being rapidly circulated through these intermediary wallets, often passing through those mixers we discussed earlier.
Ah, the mixers again.
Yes, only to be deposited back into the original fundraising contract, sometimes just moments later.
Wait. So let me get this straight. The same ETH was being used multiple times, often within hours, cycling back into the same source address it came from.
Precisely. The effect was to massively inflate the apparent interest and, the success of the ICO.
Yeah.
It created this false, completely manufactured appearance of organic demand for the tokens. Because analysts track the total volume deposited into a contract, right? And when, let's say, 97% of that volume is actually just the same money moving in a loop, it completely misrepresents the true scale of unique investment coming in from the outside.
And the sheer scale of this alleged activity, based on the blockchain analysis the SEC cited, it's truly staggering. They indicated that somewhere between 94% and 97% of the deposited ETH was recycled in the HEX ICO.
94 to 97%. Just think about that number in the context of any traditional investment offering.
It's almost unbelievable.
It suggests that the overwhelming majority of the publicly reported investor interest was allegedly just manufactured by the founders' own addresses, cycling funds, and that fundamentally misled legitimate investors about the actual legitimacy and success of the fundraising efforts. This alleged systematic fraud, that is the historical pattern that every on-chain analyst immediately remembers when they see 154,000 ETH, potentially the proceeds from that very era being systematically broken up and layered across 22 new wallets today.
So the initial acquisition of funds was controversial, deeply controversial.
Extremely.
And therefore, the subsequent movement of those funds now is, almost by default, viewed through that same lens of deep suspicion.
Exactly. The context is everything here.
Okay, now, despite those massive SEC charges, despite the seemingly compelling evidence of extensive recycling and those very specific examples of luxury purchases like the diamond, we encountered this critical twist in the legal story. And this twist fundamentally explains why Richard Heart is still active on social media, tweeting away, and why he apparently has $600 million of ETH to move around freely.
Right.
In February 2025, that highly anticipated U.S. lawsuit filed by the SEC against Hart was actually dismissed.
Yeah, dismissed. And this dismissal wasn't just, a loss for the SEC on a technicality.
Yeah.
It was a devastating, really defining blow to the U.S. regulatory body's attempt to enforce its securities laws against these globally operating, often pseudonymous crypto founders.
So why? What was the critical reason?
The critical reason for the dismissal was a profound lack of jurisdictional authority.
Jurisdiction. So the U.S. court basically admitted defeat because of technological limitations. How did they argue a lack of jurisdiction in a case involving potentially U.S. investors and definitely a U.S. regulatory body like the SEC?
Well, the argument centered primarily on the location of the assets and the transactions themselves. The court ultimately ruled that because nearly all the transactions, including the alleged recycling, the operation of the smart contracts, the fund movements passed through international wallets, international platforms, and servers located physically outside of the United States, the U.S. court lacked the necessary territorial jurisdiction to take regulatory action within the country. The founder successfully argued that his activities were decentralized and, crucially, extraterritorial beyond the reach of U.S. law.
That is a staggering legal precedent, isn't it?
Yeah.
The SEC, arguably the most powerful financial regulator in the world, identifies what it believes is billions of dollars of alleged fraud. It identifies the person allegedly responsible. It traces the funds. But ultimately, it cannot proceed because the digital chain of custody crosses international borders too many times.
That perfectly summarizes the dilemma. And Richard Heart, of course, made the absolute most of this, let's call it legal loophole.
I bet.
He publicly and very loudly claimed victory, capitalizing on the massive PR benefit that came with effectively defeating the SEC. He remains extremely active, very outspoken on social media, following the dismissal, painting himself as, a victim of regulatory overreach who ultimately prevailed. And to the casual observer, maybe someone not following the details, it looks exactly like he won a complete, clean legal victory.
Right. But winning the battle against the SEC in the U.S. is not necessarily winning the entire war, is it? While he may have avoided U.S. civil penalties, the legal pressure is still intensely real on a global stage. And that pressure is almost certainly a key contextual factor for why he might suddenly move $600 million now.
That international pressure is paramount. Yes, we absolutely need to connect the dots to other ongoing actions, specifically those being led by Finnish authorities.
Finland? Why Finland?
Well, while the SEC was pursuing civil securities fraud charges, Finnish authorities are actively pursuing Hart for alleged tax evasion and other potentially more serious criminal charges. These stem from his time actually residing in Finland.
Okay. So different country, different set of laws, potentially criminal charges, not just civil. And what's the current status of that Finnish pursuit? Is it active?
Oh, very active. Hart reportedly remains at large. He's not just dodging a civil suit or a regulatory fine in this case. There's an active Interpol red notice issued against him from Finland.
An Interpol red notice. That's serious.
extremely serious. An Interpol red notice basically means he is considered a high-priority fugitive sought by law enforcement globally for criminal prosecution or to serve a sentence. Furthermore, the Finnish authorities have already demonstrated some success in seizing assets that the SEC couldn't touch. They've reported a significant asset seizure already, including, reportedly, a $2.6 million seizure of luxury watches found within their jurisdiction.
Okay, so we have a really clear contrast here then. The U.S., focusing on securities law violations linked to the original ICO, failed because of these jurisdictional gaps related to decentralized international transactions.
Right.
Meanwhile, Finnish authorities, focusing on more traditional criminal charges like tax evasion and leveraging Interpol, successfully seized physical, real-world luxury assets, the watches, presumably because those assets had a fixed physical location within their jurisdiction that they could act upon.
Exactly, and this perfectly synthesizes the core structural challenge of the whole crypto regulatory environment. This entire case, from the sophisticated recycling mechanism to the SEC dismissal and now the subsequent mass ETH transfer, it just highlights this continuing critical debate over the difficulties regulators face trying to enforce actions against global, often pseudonymous crypto actors when traditional national jurisdiction is so easily nullified by a few international transactions.
Yeah. When wealth can move across borders with just a few clicks of a button, traditional national regulatory structures, they just can't keep pace with technology. It seems like the law is always one step behind.
Yeah.
And this leads us directly back to the $600 million ETH movement. You have a founder, cleared by one major country's regulator but actively wanted by others, moving this massive liquid fortune into a fog of 22 new anonymous wallets. Which brings us directly to that question we wanted to focus on. What are people saying online about this? Because in many ways, the crypto community itself is the ultimate sort of decentralized watchdog in this scenario. What was the immediate temperature like in the crypto forums on X, formerly Twitter, places like that, when this news broke?
Yeah, the atmosphere was it was a fascinating mix, really. On one hand, intense analytical curiosity, people digging into the transactions, trying to trace everything. But on the other hand, there was raw, palpable FUD,
Yeah.
fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
FUD, classic crypto reaction.
Absolutely. The sudden movement of such a massive amount of ETH, originating from wallets linked to an individual with this known history of alleged recycling fraud, and who's currently facing an Interpol red notice. Well, it immediately sparked fears of a possible market dump. The core concern is liquidity. And what happens if that liquidity hits the market all at once?
Yeah, I mean, when you have a single entity that just proved they can move over $600 million with almost perfect synchronization and basically zero warning, the community is rightly nervous. How are the online sleuths, the on-chain detectives, organizing their surveillance efforts now? What are they looking for?
They're definitely organized. The community discussions, the transparency groups online, they're urging extreme vigilance and essentially continued round-the-clock monitoring of those 22 new addresses. They understand that if any of those 22 new wallets start transferring large sums to centralized exchanges, places like Coinbase, Binance, Kraken.
Right, the big on-ramps, off-ramps.
Exactly. That would be the clearest, most unambiguous signal that liquidation is imminent, that he's planning to sell. So the entire goal of these on-chain sleuths is basically to get ahead of that transfer signal, broadcast the warning out to the community, and allow the rest of the market time to potentially react defensively.
Okay, let's discuss the so what then. For the average crypto holder, maybe someone holding ETH, or even just interested in the market, how does one person having control over 153,000 ETH give them such an outsized ability to impact market dynamics? I mean, considering the sheer size of Ethereum's total market cap, is $600 million really enough to crash it?
Yeah, that's a crucial distinction to make. You're right. Ethereum's overall market capitalization is massive. However, the ability to dump $600 million of liquid assets onto the market almost instantly creates significant immediate pressure on exchange order books, especially if it happens during periods of lower overall trading liquidity like weekends or holidays. So while it might not crash the entire ETH market permanently, it would almost certainly cause a sharp, sudden downturn in price. It would shake investor confidence, trigger widespread volatility, and that volatility could then be exploited by other large traders. It creates ripples.
Gotcha. And the threat is probably far more existential for the tokens within his own ecosystem, right? Like HEX, Pulse Chain.
Oh, without a doubt, yes. The transfer poses an immediate and acute vulnerability to the tokens specifically within his own project ecosystem.
Yep.
HEX, Pulse Chain, PLS, and PulseX, PLSX. If the founder were to decide to liquidate even a substantial portion of that 154,000 ETH, say, to maybe dump or short his own project tokens, maybe manipulate their price, or simply to use the proceeds for a massive fiat cash out, the price dynamics of his linked tokens could potentially collapse.
Because they're much smaller markets.
Exactly. Unlike Ethereum, where $600 million is a large chunk but maybe not world-ending, for smaller, more concentrated markets like HEX or Pulse Chain, this sudden injection or withdrawal of capital could be genuinely catastrophic. It could lead to a permanent liquidity crisis for those specific tokens.
So whether the ETH is ultimately just being stored securely or if it is actually being prepared for a dump, the mere existence of that fragmented, highly liquid wealth guarantees intense and sustained scrutiny from everyone. It's like this high-stakes game of digital cat and mouse where the stakes are over $500 million.
Exactly right. This guarantees that crypto researchers, blockchain analysts, and especially international regulatory agencies like the ones in Finland who still have active criminal cases open will renew their focus intensely on every single transaction moving out of those 22 newly created addresses. This isn't just a technical puzzle for analysts to solve. It's also kind of a massive psychological operation, isn't it?
How so?
Well, the founder is using the public visibility of the movement, perhaps, to signal continued liquidity and strength to his followers, while simultaneously using technical obfuscation tactics like layering and potential mixing to evade tangible legal action or asset seizure. It's complex signaling.
So, looking ahead then, what's the immediate focus for the people who are monitoring this situation 204/7?
Yeah.
What are the key indicators they're really waiting for to try and determine the founder's actual intent with this $600 million?
The focus has entirely shifted now to observing those 22 new wallets for any subtle continuous activity. Analysts are basically watching for two main signals, and they differentiate between them quite sharply.
Okay, what are they?
One signal is any significant movement to centralized exchanges, CEXs. Even if they try to break it up into dozens of smaller transactions to fly under the radar, any sustained substantial movement of funds heading towards known CEX deposit addresses strongly indicates preparation for liquidation. That means cashing out to fiat currency or stablecoins. That's the dump signal.
Right, and the second signal?
The second signal is sustained movement through mixers or tumblers. If the funds continue to be layered across even more new addresses, and especially if they're cycled through known mixing services, it suggests continued active obfuscation and layering. That would imply the founders trying to make the funds virtually untraceable for the long term, maybe preparing for years of legal wrangling by hiding the assets so effectively they can't be easily linked back to him or the current criminal warrants.
So it's really a waiting game at this point. And the results of this ongoing surveillance, watching those 22 wallets, will likely determine the fate of hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially the immediate future of the entire Pulse Chain ecosystem he created.
That's the situation, yeah. High stakes watching. Hashtag outro this. So, okay, let's try and bring it all back together and summarize the maybe 3 core insights that you, the listener, should take away from this really complex saga. First, just the scale. The scale of this transaction is genuinely historic, over $600 million moved in this highly synchronized fashion. That puts it among the largest on-chain transfers ever by a single entity, and that sheer size makes it impossible to ignore.
Yeah, the number itself is the headline.
Second, the deep context of regulatory avoidance and that historical fund manipulation is absolutely paramount. You have to remember the founder is linked to these serious allegations of recycling 94 to 97% of funds during previous offerings. That history means that every subsequent major transfer, particularly one of this incredible scale, is met with completely justified suspicion regarding its legitimacy and its true purpose. Context matters.
Definitely. History casts a long shadow here.
And third, this entire episode serves as a stark, very public reminder of the profound structural challenge regulators face in enforcing laws against non-jurisdictional crypto actors. I mean, if the SEC, arguably the largest financial regulator in the world, can't touch you because of arguments about international movement and decentralization, then who can? It really reveals this fundamental gap between technological capability and effective legal enforcement.
Yeah, that structural weakness really feels like the defining takeaway here for me, too. This isn't just a story about a massive crypto transfer. It's a story about the current boundaries, maybe the limitations, of global law in the digital age. So, given that $600 million moved across borders with such apparent ease, structured deliberately, it seems, for legal evasion. And all this happened just months after the SEC case was dismissed, even while the founder is still facing an Interpol red notice. we really have to ask this final question. What structural changes, if any, need to happen? Must blockchain protocols themselves, or perhaps international regulatory bodies, implement something new to prevent similar large-scale, highly questionable fund movements in the future?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Right. Do we need new tools built into the blockchain architecture itself that can somehow respect international warrants? Or must global law enforcement agencies finally unify their approach to jurisdiction, maybe making the physical location of a server irrelevant when it comes to prosecuting financial crime? That's the complex, really high-stakes question we want to leave you with today. Go explore that ongoing debate about jurisdiction and decentralization. It's fascinating. And we'll see you for the next deep dive.